You're standing around a fire. It's 50,000 BC. The sun just went down. There's no Netflix. There's no phone. But there's no existential angst about your inbox. Only you, the fire, and hot, thick, choking smoke curling right into your face. And somewhere, at some point, one of your ancestors looked at that smoke and said, "Hang on, what if I did it deliberately?" This is the tale of how smoker humans came about to be. Not cigarettes, not cigars, and definitely not the dude in front of the office you always talk to way too long. Like the very first time a human being purposefully put a burning thing to their face and inhaled it, which is probably the oldest trick in our species' book. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Smoking doesn't start with tobacco. It starts not with colonial trade routes or Native American ceremony, nor even agriculture itself. The craving to suck in smoke may be hardwired into us on a level that predates all civilization. The evidence for this is actually bonkers. Let's start with fire, because fire needs to come before all your smoking. Fire is the human story, and fire has been a part of our human story for, like, all of the time. The oldest known evidence of our ancestors using controlled fire is about 1 million years ago from Wonderwork Cave, South Africa. Archaeologists discovered remnants of burnt plant ash and charred bone, not a forest fire, but an intentionally extinguished controlled burn within a cave. Now, 1 million years ago, we were not even Homo sapiens. That was Homo erectus, our distant relative with a smaller brain, thicker than average brow, and no interest in taking pointers from you about what to do with it. They gathered around fires in the same way we do. They cooked, they stayed warm, they cloistered beneath the cover of darkness and breathed smoke. For hundreds of thousands of years, every human and pre-human ancestor who relaxed near a fire breathed smoke every single day. It was unavoidable. It was constant. It was essentially the original state of air quality with no app to check it. And this is where it becomes interesting. Part of that smoke really was not wood. Simply burning organic matter does not mean we get only carbon dioxide and water vapor. You mix a cocktail of compounds depending on what you burn. Certain plants, when burned in the ritual practice, give off psychoactive chemicals, alkaloids, terpenes, compounds that act upon the human nervous system in a manner which is noticeable, if we are being honest. Translation? At least a portion of our ancestors were getting high around the campfire, completely by accident, and had no fucking clue why everything felt so great. This isn't a fringe theory. For decades, researchers have suggested that early humans who lived in forest habitats would have been frequently exposed to the smoke of Mangaloa plants, such as cannabis, the Kochiana species, and to many other natural entheogens known from Africa, Europe, and Asia. As it turns out, human brains have receptors that interact with cannabinoids. Some receptors are not in existence because of cannabis. They developed anyway. They are part of our endocannabinoid system that regulates everything from mood to memory to appetite. However, the very existence of these means that a human's brain wasn't fooled on its first inhalation of smoke from a lit cannabis plant. "Oh hey," their brain was like, "I've been waiting for you." And that first chanced-upon whiff of mind-bending fume over a primeval campfire may actually give birth to smoking. Not a choice, not a scheme, but simply happy accident, repeated often enough that someone came along and figured it was worth trying to do intentionally. Now, sit back and let that sink in for a couple seconds. The whole bloody multi-trillion-dollar global tobacco industry, the centuries of ritual, shamanism, medicine, and social life, born because some weary hunter sat downwind of the wrong bush and had a really unexpectedly good night? History can be gorgeous in the most absurd ways sometimes. And now, we have to be a bit cautious about date ranges, because the statements that ancient humans were smoking things, and those ancient humans were even growing things on purpose to smoke, are pretty different. Now let's talk about what the archaeology really says. The earliest direct evidence for intentional cannabis use defined as burned cannabis seeds occurring in a context that suggests they were meant to be intentionally inhaled, comes from a burial site in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, dated to circa 500 BC. They also found wooden braziers with superheated stones and remnants of cannabis plants containing higher amounts of THC than those available today. This was not wild cannabis for rope or seeds. This was the good stuff, and placed right in a ritual burial context, 500 BC. That's roughly 2,500 years ago. But here is the one question that needs to be ruminating somewhere in a corner of your mind. Is it because older physical evidence is lacking that old Earth didn't exist, or merely that we have not yet recovered it? Since ashes, seeds, leaves, plant fiber almost never withstand thousands of years in the subsoil, we discover stone instruments from 3 million years ago because stone is, for all intents and purposes, indestructible. A wooden bowl stuffed with dried herbs, yes, that will get eaten away in a century or two of an average burial. Instead, a leather pouch of cannabis, which melted back into the ground years before any archaeologist ever turned up with a trowel. Thus, in this situation, the absence of evidence is by no means any evidence of absence. And then there's the Herodotus problem. The 5th century BC ancient Greek historian Herodotus graphically recounts how the Scythian nomads from the Eurasian steppe used to take a kind of vapor bath. They would pitch little cabins and heat stones in a fire until they were glowing hot and throw hemp seeds on the stones, sit inside the cabin inhaling smoke while, as Herodotus wrote it, howling with pleasure. For centuries, historians wrote him off as exaggerating or failing to understand what he had witnessed. Archaeologists began digging up Scythian burial mounds and discovering, surprise, surprise, the same bronze braziers, warmed stones, literally, and good old hemp residue that Herodotus had described. The guy was simply reporting what he saw. He wasn't embellishing. At least, he was downplaying it. So let's try tobacco, the one that almost everyone actually thinks of when one says smoking. Tobacco is a plant placed in the Nicotiana genus that is native to the Americas. That is huge, because it means tobacco was simply unknown to Old World civilizations, Europe, Africa, Asia, until mixing with the Americas in the late 15th century. As soon as European explorers hit the Caribbean in 1492, they noted that natives were doing something weird. In his journal, Columbus even wrote of how he observed men and women strolled about with little bright sticks, puffing smoke from dead leaves that were lit on fire, breathing it in and releasing out through their nostrils and mouths. His crew was baffled. His team also, just weeks later, tried it out for themselves, naturally. However, tobacco use in the Americas is vastly older than 1492. Through archaeological evidence, primarily chemical residues in pipes, tobacco has been discovered to be as old as 3,500 years ago, when the southeastern United States was called home. Others believe it could even be much older still, perhaps 10,000 years or more, linked with integral development of cultivation elsewhere in the Amazon basin. And one last thing about tobacco in ancient America. It was not recreational, not primarily. It was sacred. Tobacco was used for healing, in communication with the spirit world, and to seal peaceful agreements between tribes. To blow smoke on someone was a gesture of blessing, of solidarity, of respect. If I shouldn't have smoked, a shaman who smoked wasn't having a casual cigarette break. He was bridging a gap between worlds. The smoke itself was considered a living being, a messenger between worlds that carried prayers up and visions down. That framing matters. That explains why, for thousands of years, in many indigenous cultures, tobacco use was purely disciplined, ritualized, and controlled. You treat it with reverence when something is sacred. You don't chain smoke it at home while watching the telly. Tobacco as a casual daily habit, not just something you did on your lunch break or while waiting for the bus, is almost entirely a European invention, and a pretty recent model too. Now we need to go back, because that's not the end of this story. In fact, it's nearly a tangent. and it may be the most ancient smoking-related evidence humans have left behind in the entire archaeological record. From a location in the Great Salt Lake Desert of Utah, researchers have made their most remarkable discovery yet, one dating back to 2019. They located a hearth, or cooking and heating fire, about 12,000 years in age that contained Nicotiana attenuata seeds, a wild tobacco species native to North America. Not random seeds blown to the campfire, and they were contained in a manner that seemed intentional. It is a discovery that occurred millennia earlier than any pottery or pipe found in the area. This pushed the potential timeline of tobacco on the continent back substantially. The behavior is so universal, so persistent, and culturally agnostic that some researchers suspect it can't be an accident. In the 1980s, Ronald Siegel, then a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, claimed that animal behavior, not just human behavior, is hardwired in us. As a fourth drive to pursuit of intoxication is born, into biologically embedded like hunger, thirst, and sex. Elephants purposely seek fermented marula fruit. In Siberia, reindeer have been seen to consume Amanita muscaria and then partake of the urine of other reindeer who ingested the mushrooms. Since the psychoactive compounds are undiminished, Siberian reindeer's processing drug waste, honestly, respect. The point being, if this drive to alter consciousness is so ancient and so innate, it's quite plausible to suggest that our more recent ancestors, well before they ever domesticated a single plant, long before they had pottery or pipes or any of the gear that we typically associate with smoking, were intentionally exposing themselves to smoke containing psychoactive plants because they'd learned through their own experience that it altered something in their brain. Perhaps in rituals, they purposely burned those plants. Perhaps they chose campsites close to these plants for this exact reason. They learned, maybe, what smoke felt good and what vomited you, or gave you a season of feeling like you were on fire, which, with some plants, is a distinction that would kill you first. That's trial and error, Neolithic style. Very high stakes, occasionally literally fatal. However, the ones who survived, they truly remembered. They told others. This knowledge was handed down to generations, never written, but lived. That is how it was with most human knowledge throughout the majority of human history. Not libraries, not schools. The fiery, mouth-to-ear pipe of lived experience darkness. Now let's talk about something that never comes up in this discussion. Smoking as medicine. It may have even started medically, long before smoking became recreational or spiritual. The Ebers Papyrus is one of the oldest surviving medical books in the world, from ancient Egypt, originally 1550 BC. It describes treatments using inhalation of smoke from heated and burned herbs for conditions affecting throat or lungs. Yet, this may sound quite counterintuitive today. They treated lung issues by smoking it? You mean the Egyptians smoked to treat people? Yes, they were. And while that sounds bonkers, it should be noted that the plants they actually used in those preparations did contain real active substances with pharmacological properties when smoked, or inhaled. Ancient Greeks employed fumigation, which is the regular use of therapeutic smoke. Hippocrates, the dude you pledge an oath named for if you're a doc, described inhalation of herbal vapors to cure lung ailments and other maladies. That kind of thinking wasn't crazy for the age. Since the connection between smoke and lungs is direct, if a plant has medicinal properties of some sort, it could make sense to deliver via smoke. The lungs as a distribution system. Inhaled medicine. Asthma inhalers, anesthetic gases, and nebulizers are just examples of what we do today. The delivery method survived. Luckily, the burny part mostly didn't. Dhumapana, literally smoke drinking, is an ancient Indian practice, Ayurvedic medicine, dating back more than 3,000 years that includes inhalation of medicinal herbs through pipes. The texts are about specific plants, specific conditions, specific preparations. This wasn't casual or improvised. An intricate medical system with well-laid protocols and hundreds of years of tweaking it as it attempted to build the structures in parallel. In fact, evidence exists of ancient Chinese, ancient Mesopotamia, and erstwhile Greek acceleration. Virtually every early civilization on record that used smoking for exposure to smoke as a recognized medical practice, active healing modality. Not addiction, not coolness pointage, because it worked. Or at least sometimes. Or just enough so they kept going with it. Works sometimes was a pretty high bar during that, well, at least for the world of impacts free from antibiotics and surgery and all those tools modern medicine comes to take for granted. The other angle of this story is often overlooked and revolves around social bonding. Humans are deeply social animals. Our evolutionary history is characterized by people living in groups, and group cohesion, the ability of a group to maintain togetherness, mutual trust, concerted action, was literally a matter of life or death for most of that time. Isolated individuals died, groups survived, and there was real survival value to anything that improved social bonding. And shared rituals, above all, shared consumption of psychoactive substances, are incredibly effective mechanisms for social bonding. It provides a bonding experience amongst those undergoing this mutual, altered experience that is nearly impossible to recreate any other way. Modern neuroscience has confirmed this. Shared rituals sync neural activity, trust and group identity in tangible and recorded form. When a bunch of ancients sat in a small room, inhaling the smoke from burning marijuana or other herbs, and collectively altered their state, it was not just for recreation. That was social technology. That was the kind of deep trust and group cohesion that allowed you to go into life-threatening situations together and return alive. The smoke circle as ritual, not a party. It was infrastructure. This is where we come to the rough and tough part of this tale. The transition from holy smoking to everyday tendency is traditionally a full-blown catastrophe. Tobacco entered Europe in the 16th century and raced across the continent so quickly it will remind you of something. Smoking had gone from an exotic curiosity to a continent-wide fetish in decades. Tobacco trade as early as the 1600s across the world. In big European courts of the 1700s, snuff, powdered tobacco inhaled via nose, was in vogue. Cigars were everywhere by the 1800s. With the advent of industrially manufactured cigarettes in the early 1900s, tobacco consumption became cheaper, easier, and far more addictive than anything that had preceded it. In the hands of European industrialists, what had taken indigenous Americans millennia to transform from a measured, ritualistic, rich cultural practice was in 4 centuries turned into a mass-market consumer product. And what if the tobacco industry of the 20th century then went on to spend decades and billions of dollars suppressing the evidence that cigarettes caused cancer? The evidence their own scientists had gathered internally. They marketed cigarettes to children. All they did was hire doctors to sell their products. They enhanced the nicotine to hit quicker and harder and exit the system faster, creating more addiction. If possible, a product that is designed to be maximally destructive in its physical effects and extraction of financial value. Both a shaman and tobacco executive were working with the same plant. They barely had anything else in common. A shaman in 500 BC putting cannabis on hot stones in a ritual burial, and Donald L. Keene of Brown Williamson signing off on targeting 13 to 24-year-olds with cigarettes is one of the bigger moral gaps in human history. Both involve smoke. Very little else is the same. Therefore, when did smoking begin for our early ancestors? So the honest answer is, we really don't know for sure, and we probably never will. The physical record can reliably bring us back to 12,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier with just a measure of speculation. This behavioral drive, the drive that underlies smoking for consciousness alteration, ritual sharing of experiences, or inhaled materials used as medicine, surely predates any artifact we have patchily discovered. This could be older than fire itself. It may run as far back as cognitive leap that made us human in the first place. Why is that a new experience? The ability to connect the dots, see a spiting plant and say, "The last time I saw that on fire, I felt differently. Let me do that again." That's not addiction. That's intelligence. What we do know is this: the behavior is extraordinarily old. It predates agriculture. It predates pottery. This predates any civilization that you may have ever studied in a history course. Without a doubt, the moment the historical record begins, everywhere that humans lived, they were already taking smoke into their bodies in some way. The specific plants changed, the rituals changed, the purposes changed. Yet the behavior was so archaic that by the time somebody thought to write it down, that's rather poetic in its own sense. Given all the things that set modern humans apart from our ancestors, the technology, the medicine, hell, even the internet, and the mind-boggling quantity of content we consume each day, there are these fragile strands of continuity that survived unbroken through 100 millennia of human history. Fire, smoke, breath. The earliest forms of humanity sat together around fires, inhaling the same acrid air that you might smell at a bonfire on a hot summer night today. A handful of them, at a certain point, began to notice what that smoke was doing to them. Then the choices they made, and passed down to their children, who raised their boys to love it just right. And so on, until the Scythians were howling with pleasure in their tents, while Egyptian physicians prescribed henbane as medicine. Mayan shamans read visions in the rising smoke. Until Taino folk on a Caribbean beach giggled watching confused Europeans try tobacco for the first time, coughing till they cried. Whatever the case, next time you flick a light switch, or gather around a summer fire, or smell wood smoke on a cold night, remember that you're taking part in something much older than us all. You're doing exactly what humans have always done. You're breathing. If you liked this whirlwind 7,000 100-year trade in smoking and want to hear more of the remarkable, bizarre, even unbelievable tales from our common history, make sure to check out and subscribe to History Shock. Tap the subscribe button, click that bell icon, and come with us to discover the truths yet forgotten, the sacrifices still made, and how we are connected to our past. History Shock can show you the stories behind everything, from Campfire 1 to Fall of Empires. All them things they never taught you in school. About that, subscribe now, but not to miss the best of History Shocks.